a 5-string guitar abandoned on an airplane, a 14-year-old leaping onto a judge's table mid-solo and winning, the straight-edge kid who became famous for a drug anthem he never wrote, then Stranglehold, an 8-minute accident captured in one take that conquered America. By 1977, he stood among America's top-grossing touring acts, rivaling Led Zeppelin and the Stones. 30 million records, total domination. Then he chose the platform over the riffs and exiled himself from the kingdom he built. This is Ted Nugent's cursed destiny. Detroit, 1957. The Motor City was more than steel and assembly lines. It was a crucible where Motown soul collided with raw blues energy, where precision met primal power. And into this sonic furnace walked a 9-year-old kid named Ted Nugent, about to be bitten by the rock and roll bug. The guitar that started it all wasn't even complete. An aunt who worked as a flight attendant found it abandoned on a plane. 5 strings, no case, probably left behind by some forgotten traveler. She brought it home to her nephew, and Ted Nugent picked it up like it was destiny wrapped in wood and wire. He started by emulating Elvis Presley, James Brown, The Ventures, anyone who could make that instrument scream. The kid was obsessed. He'd practice until his fingers bled, then practice some more. By 12, he'd formed the Royal High Boys, named after the high boy shirts the greasers wore. These weren't bedroom rehearsals. This was serious business. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Then came 1964, 14 years old. A battle of the bands competition against 60 other groups. Nugent didn't just play, he leaped onto the judge's table mid-solo, guitar wailing, completely unscripted, pure bravado. The judges had no choice. The Lords won, and their prize was opening for the Supremes and the Beau Brummels at the brand new Cobo Hall. Think about that. A 14-year-old kid sharing a stage with Motown royalty before he'd even graduated high school. But Detroit gave Nugent more than opportunity. It gave him a blueprint. He'd watch Billy Lee and the Rivieras, the band that would become Mitch Ryder, and the Detroit Wheels. Their guitarist, Jim McCarty, played with a soulful intensity that burned itself into young Ted's brain. And the blues, John Lee Hooker had come north from Mississippi to work the auto plants, bringing that haunting, hypnotic riff style that would define Detroit rock. Nugent absorbed it all, the soul, the intensity, the relentless drive for perfection. He wasn't just learning to play guitar, he was learning to dominate. By 1965, the Nugent family had relocated to Chicago. Ted formed a new group and repurposed an old name he'd heard floating around Detroit, the Amboy Dukes. He had no idea it came from a novel about New Jersey street gangs. It just sounded dangerous. By 1967, they were back in Detroit and signed to a record deal. The Detroit sound was evolving into something heavier, louder, more uncompromising. The Amboy Dukes fit perfectly. Then came 1968 and Journey to the Center of the Mind. The song peaked at number 16 on the Billboard pop charts, becoming a psychedelic anthem for an entire generation. Radio stations played it constantly. Kids quoted the lyrics. The Amboy Dukes had arrived. But here's the irony that reveals everything about Ted Nugent. He didn't write those lyrics. Rhythm guitarist Steve Farmer did. And they were drenched in drug references. Leave your cares behind, and all that Timothy Leary-inspired imagery. Meanwhile, Ted Nugent was the most anti-drug person in rock and roll. He later claimed he was naive to what the song was actually about when they recorded it. The straight-edge guitarist leading the psychedelic revolution. The disconnect was almost comical. Behind the scenes, Nugent was functioning as a babysitter. He booked the shows, he maintained the equipment, he drove the tour truck, he handled the money, and constantly he was bailing bandmates out of jail for drug possession and petty crimes. While they were getting high and missing sound checks, he was making sure the amps worked and the venue got paid. The frustration built like pressure in a closed system. He was carrying the entire operation on his back, while everyone else treated it like a party. The Amboy Dukes became a revolving door. Musicians were hired and fired with brutal efficiency. If you couldn't keep up, if you caused problems, you were gone. Nugent demanded discipline in a scene defined by excess, and that created perpetual friction. By the mid-1970s, the Amboy Dukes had plateaued. The hits had dried up. The psychedelic moment had passed, and Ted Nugent made a calculated decision: dissolve the group, reinvent himself, and bet everything on his own name. 1975, Ted Nugent partnered with producer Tom Werman. The mission was clear: take the raw, unfiltered energy of his live shows and capture it on vinyl. The result was the self-titled debut album that launched the Gonzo persona. The cornerstone was an 8-minute epic that would define his career forever. No traditional chorus, just a hypnotic, blues-infused groove built around a singular, pulsing bass line. The guitar solo, that became legendary, was recorded in a single take on Nugent's Gibson Birdland. It wasn't even supposed to be the final version, it was just a guide track to show the band where the dynamics should rise and fall. But there was magic in that spontaneity. Something raw, something real. Tom Werman knew it immediately. They kept it. And FM radio stations across America fell in love with it. Program directors who usually insisted on 3-minute radio edits made an exception for Stranglehold. 8 minutes of pure, unfiltered guitar mastery. It became the song DJs played when they wanted to prove they weren't corporate sellouts. It was the anthem of the underground becoming the mainstream. For listeners who felt trapped by the polished pop dominating the charts, Stranglehold was a lifeline. This was music that didn't apologize, didn't compromise, didn't care what anyone thought. But here's what most people don't realize. Ted Nugent wasn't the voice on most of those early hits. Derek St. Holmes was. That soaring vocal on Hey Baby, Just What the Doctor Ordered, even Stranglehold. That was St. Holmes. Nugent was the guitar, the force, the engine. But St. Holmes was the melody, the humanity, the counterpoint that made it all work. The interplay between Nugent's aggressive guitar and St. Holmes's classic rock vocals created a synergy that turned the Ted Nugent Band into one of the most ferocious live outfits in America. They didn't just play shows, they assaulted stages. Between 1976 and 1978, Ted Nugent experienced a commercial hot streak that few rock artists ever achieve. The 1976 album Free for All went platinum, despite significant internal friction. Derek St. Holmes briefly quit during the sessions, and Nugent brought in an unknown vocalist named Meatloaf to handle vocals on 5 tracks. The chaos didn't matter. The album was a monster. Then came 1977 and Cat Scratch Fever. The title track became Nugent's only top 40 single, peaking at number 30. The album sold over 3 million copies in the United States alone. By the end of 1977, Ted Nugent and his band were recognized as one of the top-grossing concert acts in the country. Not just in hard rock, in the entire country, they were unstoppable. The live experience was the engine of this dominance. Nugent took the stage in a loincloth, swinging from ropes, firing flaming arrows at his amplifiers. It was theater. It was primal. It was everything the buttoned-up corporate world wasn't. Fans didn't just watch. They experienced something visceral. The volume was so loud your chest vibrated. The energy so intense that arenas felt like they might collapse. The 1978 release of Double Live Gonzo captured this spectacle on vinyl. The album went triple platinum, cementing its place as one of the definitive live albums of the decade. For fans who couldn't get to the shows, this was the next best thing. 22 minutes of Cat Scratch Fever extended into an epic journey. Stranglehold stretched to its absolute limits. This was the peak. 30 million records sold, arenas filled, radio domination. Ted Nugent was the king of American hard rock, and nobody could touch him. Concert promoters fought for the chance to book him. Radio stations built entire programming blocks around his albums. He was everywhere. Magazine covers, television appearances, rock documentaries. The Motor City Madman had conquered the entire country through sheer force of will and volume. The American dream, realized through distortion and defiance. But the cracks were already forming. As the 1970s became the 1980s, the world started changing faster than Ted Nugent was willing to accept. Punk exploded with its stripped-down aggression and anti-establishment fury. New Wave arrived with synthesizers and skinny ties. MTV launched in 1981, prioritizing image and polish over raw power. Nugent refused to adapt. He dug in, louder, heavier, more uncompromising. What once felt like confidence began to feel like defiance. What once felt like authenticity began to feel like stubbornness. While other arena rock bands were hiring synthesizer players and changing their image for MTV, Nugent doubled down on the loincloth and the arrows. He saw the new wave as a betrayal of everything rock and roll stood for. He wasn't going to compromise. Not for radio, not for MTV, not for anyone. The band fractured under the pressure. Playing over 300 shows a year, living together in close quarters for years, the irritability reached a breaking point. Derek St. Holmes and bass player Rob Grange departed permanently in 1978, citing personal, financial, and creative differences. St. Holmes later revealed the core issue. Nugent's need to be the sole leader and focus of attention clashed with everyone else's desire for a democratic band structure. The counterpoint was gone. The melodic balance was shattered. Nugent started taking over more lead vocal duties himself, but his voice lacked the soaring quality that had made those early albums transcendent. The commercial indicators reflected this erosion. The 1981 live album Intensities in 10 Cities peaked at number 51, a catastrophic decline from the triple platinum heights of double live Gonzo. Studio albums like State of Shock and Scream Dream saw diminishing sales and fewer enduring radio standards. Critics began calling his stage persona a cartoon. The loincloth and the flaming arrows that once felt revolutionary now felt like a tired routine. The Tarzan act was wearing thin. And worse, it was overshadowing his legitimate guitar talent. The machine was still running, but the fuel was running out. Ted Nugent's fall wasn't about losing his talent. It wasn't about aging out of relevance. It was about a deliberate pivot toward a political and social identity that eventually marginalized him from the rock mainstream. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Nugent's public persona was increasingly defined by his role as a board member of the National Rifle Association and his vocal, often inflammatory commentary on social issues. This shift was so pronounced that critics noted he became far better known for the outrageous noises coming out of his mouth than for the slightly louder, outrageous sounds blasting out of his amplifiers. The consequences were immediate and total. Radio stations that once played Stranglehold on repeat quietly removed him from rotation. Not because the music had aged poorly, but because the man behind the music had become too polarizing for broad market broadcasters. Program directors made the calculation that the controversy wasn't worth the airtime. Slowly, methodically, the industry that had once celebrated him began to distance itself. The songs were still great, but the man had become untouchable. The clearest symbol of this exile is his relationship with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Nugent has been eligible for induction since 2000. He's never received the call. He claims it's because of his political views, his involvement with the NRA, his refusal to conform to what he calls the rotten leadership's biases. Whether he's right or wrong doesn't matter. The perception of exclusion became part of his identity. For an artist who sold 30 million records, who was once a top-grossing act in America, this transition to cultural exile represented a dramatic contraction of influence. The center stage that was once his alone now belonged to someone else. And here's the tragedy. It was largely a choice. By prioritizing his voice over his instrument, by making himself the story instead of the music, he stepped out of the rock pantheon and into the center of a cultural war. The exile was self-imposed. Today, Ted Nugent continues to tour with a ferocity that defies his age. But the scale of his world has undeniably narrowed. He headlines smaller theaters, opens for classic rock staples like Styx and REO Speedwagon, plays outdoor festivals for hunting and conservation communities. This isn't the mainstream, this is the fringe. And Nugent has made peace with that reality. He remains a technically proficient guitarist, still wielding his Gibson Birdland with precision and power. Contemporary musicians admire his playing, even if they distance themselves from his politics. Younger guitarists study his technique, acknowledge his influence, then quickly add disclaimers about not endorsing his views. The separation is complete. For the dedicated fans who continue to attend his shows, the experience is one of shared heritage, a collective memory of a 1970s American dream that Nugent still represents. These aren't casual concert goers. These are true believers who never stopped listening. The separation from the rock establishment is total. He's pivoted to digital platforms and social media, claiming that the tech entities have attempted to silence him. This narrative of persecution reinforces his bond with his remaining audience, a man standing alone against a world that moved on without him. His version of partying hardy now involves campfires, target practice, and clean living. The excess traditionally associated with rock stardom has been replaced by a different kind of intensity, one rooted in individualism and self-reliance. The arena is smaller, the spotlight is dimmer, but for those still listening, the riffs remain as powerful as ever. The legacy of Ted Nugent is one of the most contested in modern music history. On one hand, his contributions to hard rock guitar are undeniable. Stranglehold remains a masterpiece of rhythmic tension. His influence echoes in the work of countless guitarists who favor raw aggression over technical precision. For many, his riffs are inseparable from the memories of 1970s youth. That soundtrack is permanent. The opening notes of Stranglehold still trigger something primal in men who grew up with that music. It's muscle memory, encoded in their DNA. The feel of vinyl, the rebellion. Those memories can't be erased, no matter how complicated the man behind them became. On the other hand, the man himself has become so intertwined with controversy that many find it impossible to listen without the filter of his public persona. The tragedy of his exile is that it was an active choice. He chose the platform over the instrument. He chose the fight over the music. Whether his work will eventually outlive the controversies is a question of historical perspective. Some argue his exclusion from the Rock Hall of Fame is a sacrilege to the art form itself. Others believe the hall has every right to distance itself from figures who alienate their core values. Ultimately, Ted Nugent remains a uniquely American phenomenon. A kid from Detroit who achieved the unthinkable, only to stand on the outside, looking in. His story is a reminder of the power of the riff, but also the isolating potential of the platform. A cautionary tale about what happens when the message overtakes the music. For all the fans who still have his albums on the shelf, the Motor City Madman is a permanent fixture of their history. A reminder of a time when the volume was cranked, the tank was full, and the center stage was his alone. The music will endure. The man will remain contested, and the question, can you separate the two, will never have a simple answer. Ted Nugent proved that 30 million records can't always buy a permanent seat at the table when the world changes the conversation. He conquered arenas, dominated radio, and became the soundtrack to American freedom. But the platform that made him heard eventually drowned out the riffs that made him legendary. His exile wasn't imposed, it was chosen. What's your memory of the Motor City Madman? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from rock's most complicated legends.